Good evening, everybody. Hi. I know I'm going to forget to do this, so I'm going to do it right off the bat. I want to thank Bill and Mary Jo and Marcia and Bud for bringing tonight some goodies for tonight to help Jude out. Jude works very hard in the dessert department, and so volunteers and gifts from your own oven are very much appreciated. So thank you very much. So just a little housekeeping before we begin. Monday's program, we're back on track on Monday, features Lenore Skomal, who will present America's Lost Heroine, The Lightkeeper's Daughter, the remarkably true story of Ida Lewis. The book of the same name is in its 20th year of publication, so it's an enduring and popular tale. Tonight's program is a true story, but one that is much a different ilk than our usual. No happy ending here. This is a story of a 1976 murder that, along with the two trials that ensued, rocked the city, and its reverberations were felt across the state, region, and country. When I announced that this would be one of our programs, I started hearing a lot of stories, all true, from members of our Tales of Cape Cod community. A lot of people have apparently experience with the combat zone. Maybe some of you will share those stories during our question and answer after the program. I don't want to out any of you. But indeed, even I am familiar with the combat zone, having gone to law school down the street and giving it a wide berth as I walked from the bus to law school, lest someone confuse me with one of the girls. Tonight's program is sponsored by Brian and Kathy Smith, owners of Barnesville Market, and we thank them for their continued and ongoing support. Tonight's program is also respectfully sponsored by Charles and Nancy Mueller. Tonight's story is one that is sharply remembered with sorrow by Charlie Mueller especially. Andrew Popolo, the Harvard student who we will learn was so brutally murdered, had a younger brother who apparently looked exactly like him. He was also a college student. His coursework included classes in economics taught by Charlie Mueller. The pain of Andrew's stabbing and the agony of his coma deeply affected Andrew's brother, as you can well imagine. He shared this agony with Charlie, creating a never-to-be-forgotten experience. So thank you very much for sponsoring. Tonight we are pleased to host as our guest speaker, Jan Brogan. Jan Brogan grew up in Clifton, New Jersey, and moved to New England to study journalism at Boston University. She holds a master's degree in English from the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Ms. Brogan has been a journalist for more than 30 years. She has worked as a correspondent for the Boston Globe, a staff writer for the Worcester Telegram, and the Providence Journal. She won the Gerald Loeb Award for Distinguished Business Writing while at the Providence Journal. She is also the award-winning author of 4 mysteries: Final Copy, Confidential Source, Yesterday's Fatal, and Teaser. Transactional Pictures, that's Steven Soderbergh and Philip Fleischman, purchased the rights to Confidential Source for development. Currently, Ms. Brogan teaches writing at the Boston University Summer Journalism Institute and lives with her husband in a Boston suburb. We appreciate that she drove all the way over the bridge to be with us tonight. So let's welcome Jan Brogan.
Well, I'd like to begin by thanking Anne for reaching out and for that lovely introduction, and thank all of you for being here tonight. And I have a couple of friend authors, Janice Daly and Diane Bonavist, who are here, who also are excellent writers. I just want to mention their work before I get caught up in the subject, because you'll see it takes over my brain once I start. So the Combat Zone is essentially about a terrible murder, a very tragic murder. And it's a lot about Danny Popolo. Critics have said he's the heart and soul of the book, because he's on a quest for justice first from the criminal justice system, and then revenge. And he has all the opportunity and all the access if he wants to enact that revenge. And a lot of this book is about his struggle with that. And I think it's also very interesting that I'm doing this, and this is the first time I've ever spoken in an old courthouse, because this book is all about justice, so it just seems perfectly right. But essentially, this book is also about Boston. So I like to begin by taking you back to Boston 1970. And I'm guessing a lot of you were there. Raise your hands if you were in Boston in 1970, right? So it was I was in Boston, or 1976, I should say. I was in Boston in 1976, but I was a college student, and even though I was a journalist reporting on it, I still had no clue what was going on. But to go back there, and to research it, it's really, given what Boston is like today, how affluent it is, it's kind of shocking to go back and see just how poor the city was in 1976. The city had lost like 200,000 residents. This is like over a couple decades. The shipyard, the Charlestown shipyard had closed. They were losing manufacturing, their jobs, and any new businesses were starting up on 128 and 495 because of those federal highway laws, and because of federal lending. It was easy to get a house in the suburbs, right? To get yourself a house. So people were moving out in droves. And the downtown was fairly dead, and people did not think that, people said, the cities are never coming back. A lot of it had to do with the race riots of the 60s, and the crime quadrupled from the 60s to the 70s. So people were saying, cities are never coming back. Boston's never coming back. We all should have been buying downtown real estate. But we weren't, so maybe somebody here was, but I wasn't. And so to the city, so Boston had a red light district at Scully Square, and it was more like a burlesque. And they tried to they did get rid of it. They used urban renewal funds, and they bulldozed it, and they put up the city hall, the Boston City Hall. And what they learned from that experience, when all those businesses just moved down Lower Washington, was that urban planning is no match for market forces. Right? So all these businesses, not only do they move down the street, they start to boom. Right? So in the mid-70s, there's 35 adult entertainment businesses. We're talking strip clubs, bars, topless bars, there's a bathhouse. There's they called them the peep shows, where you put the quarter in the reel, and it's booming. And interestingly enough, it's like pretty much the only new business that is booming in Boston in those days. And I'll just show you what it looks like. Let's see. Okay, so that's what it looks like, right? And it's kind of, buildings are falling apart. This building, where you see it, the adult bookstores were big then. Remember, there's no internet, there's no DVDs. If you want pornography, you're going to go to the adult bookstore. And they were quite elaborate. But that building is the Hayden Building, right? Which is designed by Henry Hobson Richardson, the architect of Trinity Church. So you actually have some beautiful buildings there going into decay. And so the question is, how did a puritanical city like Boston, like actually founded by Puritans, best known for banning Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass and the film I Am Curious Yellow, how did it end up with an officially sanctioned red light district? Well, it's because they had tried to get rid of Scully Square, and they saw that didn't work, right? So, and there's this also, and Kevin White is the mayor, and he wants a world-class city. And he's been working with like the Vault. You remember the business interests, and the mayor before him was too. And they had this dream of, they call it the high spine, I think. They want skyscrapers coming from Mass Ave all the way down to the waterfront, kind of parallel to where the Pike runs. You know, because in Boston, you can't have them everywhere because you have so much historical architecture you're trying to preserve. But they have this idea of the high spine, the new world-class Boston. But there's this dark hole in that spine, and that's the combat zone. But this is the thing. This is the dirty little secret. It's the only business that's booming. Tourism depends on it. The convention business depends on it, right? So and also, to be fair, the Supreme Court and high Massachusetts court decisions had made it really hard to get rid of, because they made it really hard to define what is obscene, and they don't know what to do. So, and they don't really want to get rid of it. So, they decide they can't outlaw it. But what you can do is, if you contain it within a certain specific area, you can make it illegal everywhere else. So this is the solution they come up with in 1974. They create this. That's the combat zone. It's by Stewart Street. And what they say is, if anybody remembers, there was the Playboy Club was in Park Square. And they said, when they did this decision, if you're existing in Park Square, you can stay there. But you're like once you sell that business, there's no grandfathering in. But they create this section which says you can grandfather, you know, this is the adult entertainment district. So it's meant as containment, but very quickly it's interpreted as license. And they do things like they let them have neon, which was a big deal for Boston because it's the only place you can have neon. They let them have neon. And then they also, the Boston Redevelopment Authority says, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to clean it up. We're going to give it good services. We're going to clean up signage, and we're going to police it. So they start with trying to improve the signage, and they get a lot of pushback from the owners who don't want to pay for it. So the effort to clean it up lasts maybe 6 months to a year. Not even 6 months, I don't think. And pretty soon, pretty soon, it's utterly corrupt. So why? These guys. These are the Angiulo brothers, the crime family. And what happens is the police enforcement never happens. Not only does it not happen, they're utterly corrupt. I had the good fortune of being able to interview the police commissioner who was in charge then, who was brought in from California, Robert, oh my God, DeBassia. And he was brought in, I'm butchering his name, he was brought in to clean it up. And he said, I knew I was hired to clean it up, the police department, but I didn't know it was the most corrupt police department in the nation. So why was it so corrupt? Part of it, a lot of people say, is because at the 1919 strike, what happened was the whole force went out on strike. So what happens was they were rehired. They're all the same age, and they age in and they age out together. And so what happens is they have long times to bond and enforce the status quo. So, and this is also right next to the North End, which is the capital for New England, the New England capital of the mob is in Providence, but the Massachusetts capital is in the North End, and the Angiulo brothers are in charge. And this is the heyday for the mob. I think it was 1972, the Godfather movie came out, and it kind of glorified the mob, it kind of normalized them, glamorized them, and they're making money hand over fist. And so they have plenty of bribe money. So pretty soon it's estimated that, all right, so it's Bob DeGrazia. So he says that this is the part I love. He commissioned a secret investigation into his own police department. I just find that stunning. It's like over a couple of years. They produced like a 350-page report which details the corruption in small and large ways. And some of the small ways are like they let all the mobsters double park, One of the superintendents actually, I love this part, he acts as an honor guard at one of the Angiulo brothers' mother's funeral, like directing traffic. This is a Boston cop, right? So and those are the small ways. But the large ways are there are cops tipping off their own department's investigation. So they're tipping off the mob about their own secret investigations. They're also extorting sex. Not all of them, but there's like 6 of them in the report who are extorting sex from the prostitutes in the combat zone. It's really kind of an ugly report. But one of the things this report talks about, and this will become important in the murder, is they talk about this for a while. It's not. So this is 76. The report comes out like the week before the murder, or 2 weeks before the murder. But they had been, even before that, they had this new development. Well, and there's young women, like 16, 17, 18, who are dressed, look like prostitutes. Very often they're black. And they hang around the bars. And when the men come out drunk, they sidle up to them, fondle them, and steal their wallets. So essentially, it's a pickpocket scam, right? And one of I was able to speak to one of the guys worked in the area, hustler in the area, and he said one of the sad things was the reason they were black was because there was racism even then. The young black women couldn't get a pimp to protect them. So they often worked this hustle. And the interesting part is that other prostitutes were annoyed about it. They would actually tell the paper, look, we're the legit prostitutes, and they're ruining business for us. And so, but it was a thing. Men were getting their wallets stolen all the time. It was often reported in the paper. And this report says, well, there's a new wrinkle in this scam. Now these women have men working for them, and for a cut of the wallet, they'll go beat up a mark who notices his wallet is going, and it starts to complain. And DeGrazia told me, yeah, and the sad thing was, some of them were cops. He said, one of the sad things about the 70s was it's so poor, it took so little to buy a cop. He said, and not all cops are dirty. He said 50% are good and they're trying to do their job, but at this point he estimates 50% are on the take. And he said, and the sad thing was how little it took to buy them. So on a typical Saturday night in the combat zone in 1976, and I talked to a former cop, he said, there would be on LaGrange Street, there would be 60 prostitutes just walking the streets, 60, right in front of Good Time Charlie's, milling about, waiting for business. There was sex was, it was going on in the movie theaters, in the X-rated movie theaters. It was going on in the alleys. In that 4-block area I showed, traffic would be at a gridlock because in the summertime, the windows would be open and the women would be soliciting cop-stop cars through the windows. Drugs were sold on the street. And remember, this is an era when not that many people are using credit cards, although one enterprising strip club found a way to let men charge for sex on their credit card. This will come out later when they get. But mostly it's cash, right? When you go to a strip club or you're going to buy sex or drugs, usually it's cash. So everyone's carrying a lot of cash. So that makes it a really good market for pickpocketing, right? Everybody's got full wallets. So on this night, oops, wrong way. Okay, on this night, I think it's November 15th, 1976, the Harvard football team meets at the Harvard Club. It's the end of the season is over, and they go for, as is their custom, as the ritual, they go for their last dinner, their season-ending banquet at the Harvard Club on Comm Ave. And they have speeches. Ethel Kennedy is there. It's very Tony. Ethel Kennedy is there to give out an award in her husband's name. They go through the speeches about everything that happened in the season. And when it all breaks up, as is the custom, all the football players go down to the combat zone for a last drink together as a team. And they're not, was one of the football players, his uncle or cousin, they know a manager, and they get a private room in back. They go down, 40 of them, and they're still in their three-piece suits and, their 70s hair, and they go to the Naked Eye for the Totally Nude College Girl Review. And they've had a few drinks, they're having a good time. But the interesting thing is that nobody was dissuaded by the report just the week before that the Common Zone is crime-ridden and totally lawless. They even go down in a Harvard van with the Harvard equipment manager. All I could think about is that was my son when he went to college. I would have killed somebody, But they take him down, and they meet and they have a drink. They're having a good time. Two of them get up on the stage with the stripper to dance. They get thrown out, but it's like closing time anyway. They all dispense on the seat. And one of the sad things about this murder is that even like years later when I was doing the research, people will say, oh, Andy Popolo, that's that kid who went down to the combat zone for sex and got his wallets, and he got killed trying to get his wallet back from a prostitute. And that's not what happened at all. When they disperse, Andy Popolo is already in the back of a car with friends ready to go home. He was already accepted to medical school. There were exams that week. He wasn't able to drink that much because he'd had a concussion on the Sunday game. He's already in the back of the car. He has nothing to do with how this fight gets started. But there's 7 other Harvard football players who are walking on their way from they're across Washington Street, and they pass the Carnival Lounge, and there are 3 young, they call them robber whores. It's a really terrible name, but that's what they call them, young, and they start talking to them. They start doing their thing, and they're not all white. The three in the front are young black football players, but they apparently are the only ones who've been reading the news, and they're like, it's during busing, so they don't want anything to do with trouble on a city street. And they're like, get out of here, get out of here, get out of here. And they tell the other, don't talk to them. But one guy's really drunk, and he does talk to them. And soon enough, the girls follow them, or are, depending on the testimony, or are invited back to the Harvard van. One of them gets inside. She can't be there for very long. From all the testimony, it's 3 to 5 minutes. And they're trying to get her, one guy is trying to get her to come back to the campus. And she bolts out of the van. He notices the friends say, check your pocket, and his wallet is missing. And 3 of them jump out and chase her. Actually, there's 2 prostitutes, but they go in opposite directions. The chase winds up going down Boylston Street, the opposite way from traffic, to the MTA station that's on the corner of Tremont, that's on the Boston Common. And first they chase the prostitute. One of the other guys, because they're yelling to their teammates, stop her, stop her. Somebody stops her and she falls, and he picks her up and he says, do you have the wallet? And she says, no. He says, Okay. And he lets her go. And then 3 black men come out. One of them is Edward Soares. No, keep doing that. That's Andy Popolo. That's the victim. There are actually two men who will be stabbed. He's the only one who loses his life. He's 20 there. That's what he looks like. So these 3 men, let me see where my pointer is. Okay. So this is Leon Easterling, this is Edward Soares, and this is Richard Allen. Richard Allen and Easterling are related. And these aren't young guys. He's like 41 or 42. He's 35, 36, and he's 32. They were drinking in the Carnival Lounge. Edward Soares comes out. According to his testimony, he sees a black woman being chased down the street by 40, like it's not 40, it's like maybe 10 white football players. He goes and he gets in a scuffle with the guys. He kicks a few, they wind up kind of, he backs up to the MTA station, they wind up in a circle around him. He comes, Leon Easterling, these 2 come, and Tom Lincoln, who will go and become a doctor, is there. He's a Harvard football player. Leon Easterling jumps there. He says, "Come on, let's go, guys. They don't have the wallet." Just as soon as he finishes saying that, Leon Easterling jumps on him and knifes him in the abdomen. Now, these are suburban white guys, right? They're like, knives! And they turn around and they run back to the Harvard van. These 3 guys follow them, and there's another guy he's referred to as the man in the cranberry jacket. And this is the mystery. For one thing, at the trial, and I've read the transcripts 3 times, both sets of trials, no one can decide what race he is. Some people say he's white, some people say he's Hispanic, some people say he's black. Danny Popolo told me he thought he probably was Italian because the mob rules, and he's the only one who doesn't get caught, ever. Nobody knows his still to this day. But he joins them, and the Harvard football players are in, like they're stuffing themselves back into the van. They all get in except this one guy, Charlie, and the man with the cranberry jacket pulls him out and is slamming his head because they're beating him against the van. At this point, Andy Popolo, who's down the street, when he sees his teammates running back, he gets out of the van to see what's going on, his cart, gets out of the car, comes and sees, and when he gets to the alley where this is happening, he sees one of his teammates alone outside being pummeled by this guy, and he goes in to help. And that's how the fight starts. And but he doesn't, Tom Lincoln, who's got a gash in his stomach, gets out of the van and knocks the guy with the cranberry jacket down and gets Charlie, who's back in the van. By the time Andy gets there, and this is all in a matter of minutes, he gets into a fight with with Soares. And Soares is kind of a small guy. He's built, but he's not very tall. And they're into it. They fight around the van. He comes, Leon Easterling, and he jumps over him, and he stabs Andy in the stomach. A friend, another teammate, Scott, goes in, gets Andy, and says, "Let's get the hell out of here. Are you all right?" And Andy says, "Yes." And he pulls them, and they're leaving across Boylston Street, and Leon Easterling comes after them and stabs a second time. This time, up into the stomach and into the heart. Richard Allen the only testimony, there is one guy who seems to think he was involved, and there's a lot of witnesses, like 13 out of 14 witnesses say, no, he didn't do anything. And they say he was saying, "Go home, Harvard boys, get out of here, you're over your head," basically. That was his role. But he's a big, big guy. He was a bouncer at the Carnival Lounge, so he's a big guy. So they race Andy to the hospital. He lies dead on arrival. He bled out. But they're able to restart his heart. And by the time the family gets there, they're told it looks good. He has a couple surgeries. His eyes responded, his pupils responded to light. He's such a strong, because of, his athlete, he's such a strong heart, we think he's going to make it. And this is the news that goes around the world. This is a big story. It's covered by more than 300 newspapers across the nation, from Maine to Montana to Louisiana. Even the Stars and Stripes in Japan covers this story. Why? There's a couple reasons. One, it's Harvard. White victims, black defendants. And there's another reason, too. It's because this is the time when the nation is going through what they call the porno plague. Because it's not just Boston that's wrestling with these adult entertainment businesses starting up in their downtown. The northern cities in general are failing. Remember New York? This is 1976. Remember all those pictures of the trash lined up? Northern cities are in decay. Downtown real estate is inexpensive. Rents are cheap, and this is where the adult entertainment industry is setting up shop. And Boston's solution, and like towns are wrestling with this, amazes the rest of the country. They're like, Boston, like the Puritans, the ones who just banned I Am Curious Yellow, and they're really kind of shocked by this. And this story proves big mistake, right? Big mistake. You made the wrong, like Detroit takes the exact opposite solution. In Detroit, instead of putting it all in one area, they say they have to be so far apart, which probably was the way to go. So this is covered. So by the time Danny Popolo, the family gets notified 2 o'clock in the morning, they go down to the hospital. And, by the time they're leaving in the morning, there's already like movie and film, TV and radio, and the streets are full of the press, just ready to pounce on this story. And they like you said, I didn't even realize it wasn't about us. It wasn't about Andy. It wasn't about Andy. This was all about the combat zone, because the combat zone was controversial nationally, and it was controversial within the city. Ray Flynn, who will become the next mayor, is at the combat zone the next day with a petition to shut it down. Cardinal Medeiros wants to shut it down. People have really, it's gotten more and more crime-ridden, and people have had enough of it, and they want it gone. And so the first trial will become a lot about the combat zone. And so Andy dies. He's in a coma for a month at Tufts. And that's kind of a carnival, too, because like every politician in the city and the state are coming through. It becomes a very big political event. And but he dies in December. By March, so that's 3 months, they take this to trial. That's unheard of today. 3 months, and they take it to trial. While they're in trial, all the headlines, because what happened was the Suffolk, Garrett Byrne, who was the Suffolk County District Attorney, had always hated the combat zone. He'd been trying to shut it down. He'd been doing his own secret investigations. So while this trial is while they're trying to collect a jury, or it's not just about murder, but it's every day there's headlines. They shut down this strip club because of violations. They shut down this bar because of violations. They found out, the one about the club that had been letting men charge oral sex on their credit cards. All this stuff is coming out in hearings that are getting headlines day after day. And this is the kind of the atmosphere of the first trial. So, let me see where we are. And don't forget busing. All right. So this is right in the middle of busing. And there is so much violence, and there's so much anger, and justifiable anger. But the neighborhoods that are most affected by this that's where the jury is coming from. So as Henry Owen, who's a black attorney who will represent Richard Allen, says whites were in no mood to consider the rights of black defendants. They were feeling very much put upon and burdened by busing. And I don't know, I mean, you guys probably lived through busing, but I was shocked by the level of violence. I mean, I knew it was violent. I did the research on it. Like the National Guard was called into Southie. There were stabbings. There's one kid who gets stabbed by a black kid, stabs a white kid in Southie outside the library, and they take him to the hospital. By the time they get back, there's 3,000 people surrounding the high school. They can't figure out how to get the black kids out of the school without getting killed. They call their parents, and even Louise Day Hicks, who is the biggest protest, they call her down. She tries to settle them down, and she gets booed. Go home, Louise. And she's their patron saint. It's very violent. The first year they keep track of racial violence, black on white, and it's both ways, but the statistics will say it's more white on black. But the first year that the police start to keep data is 1978, which is past the peak. And it's 604 incidents in a single year. That's violence, and that's reported. If you look at I know hate crimes are going up, but when I was writing this book, I was looking at 2018, and it was something like 98 for the year, and that wasn't just black on white, that was, Asian, that was, gay hatred, there was all sorts of hate crimes. But this is, in a single year, 604. So it's a very, very violent city. All right, so so it goes to trial, and they have a hard time choosing a jury because everyone's been exposed to the publicity, right? But Tom Mundy is the prosecutor, and Tom Mundy is the top prosecutor in the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office. He will go on to have a terrific career. Other prosecutors just sing his praises, and defense lawyers hate him. But he is working for Garrett Byrne, who's been anti-combat zone the whole time. And I feel like he had passed away, so I couldn't interview him. I interviewed his friends. But I feel like he had felt some political pressure, because he charges not just Leon Easterling with murder, he charges all three of them, all three black defendants, Leon Easterling, Richard Allen, and Soares, Edward Soares, with murder in the first degree, which means if they're convicted, they will spend their lives in prison without the opportunity of parole. Now, he's using something called joint venture. Joint venture is like the state version of the felony murder rule, which says, like, if you're driving the pickup, the getaway car, and the guy goes in, and he holds up the bank, and he kills someone, you're equally guilty. And joint venture is very much like that. And he's basically saying, all three of them were working for those prostitutes in that rubber horse. They were all working as protectors for those prostitutes. And so they're all guilty. But they're all in it together, like a conspiracy. But he's also using joint venture in another way, which means, so when they're at that T station and Leon Easterling stabs Tom Lincoln and they run, and they all run, and the three men follow them, they know Leon Easterling had a knife and would use it. So when they go with him back to the van, that gives them premeditation. There's also testimony they were saying, we're going to kill you, honkies, So they charge all three of them. Now, normally that's a pretty hard sell to a jury, because you're asking a jury to put people away for life who didn't actually murder anybody. But the jury, and it's, it's caught, Mundy put on a very strong case. He had something like 14 eyewitnesses. And the medical evidence alone was really damning, because it shows like 2 scars, and it shows that he went back to it. But the jury starts to deliberate about, after lunch on Thursday, they break at 5. They only deliberate to I think it's 9 or 10:20 the next morning, and then they come back with all 3 of them guilty in the first degree. So now what happens is the family, which up until that point had been getting a lot of sympathy, and Andrew Sr. is he's a very gracious man. And as a journalist myself, I would, he has these lovely quotes, and he's not full of anger or fury. He's just very reasoned, just a very sympathetic figure. But the moment they come up with this conviction, it's like the tables turn. All of a sudden, it's a racist trial, and everyone's racist, and Andy Popolo's name will go down. One of the things the family said to me when I did this, they said, just make clear, his name is associated with racism. He had nothing to do with this. He was also of the teammates, like at Boston Latin. I talked to a lot of people. We went to Boston Latin, Harvard, and they all said he was the guy on the team who had all the friends of the black guys. He bunked with them at camps and stuff. So, so the family all of a sudden loses sympathy, and it becomes very much at this dedication of Popolo Park. What happens is the North End gets together, and they said petition, and they rename a park on Commercial Ave, right on the water where Andy and Danny had grown up playing sports, and they dedicate it to Andrew Popolo. But at that dedication ceremony, you can tell who comes, who the politicians, all the Louise Day Hicks and Pixie Palladino and all the anti-busing people come, and Kevin White doesn't show up because he's trying to stay neutral, and it becomes politicized. And then what happens is Henry Owen says from the start he knew they weren't going to get a fair trial. For one thing, he was trying to separate the trials, because he said Leon Easterling is guilty of murder in the first degree. He said Soares, probably manslaughter, or and my client, he's Richard Allen, he said he should just get off. He didn't do anything. So he wants them separated. The Judge Roy, is known as the hanging judge. And he said once he knew Judge Roy got it, he just knew he didn't have a stand. He said there was too much publicity, there was too much emotion. So from the very beginning, he's keeping track of jury selection. And he said he had seen Mundy do this too many times before, and it's not just Mundy. It's not just prosecutors, it's the defense, and it's not just Boston, it's the whole nation. Lawyers use the peremptory challenges, if you ever see the movies where the jury selection, where the lawyer says, no, I strike him. It's like lawyers on each side, particularly in a murder case, have something like, well, in this case, they had 14, I think, apiece for each defense, so Mundy had 48 peremptory challenges, which means after the judge clears them and says, okay, they can be unbiased, the lawyer can just say, nope, don't like him, he's off. And they don't have to say, or she's off, and they don't have to say why. So basically what they were doing all the time was, if there were black defendants, the prosecution would get rid of all potential black jurors, In this case, the defense got rid of 17 potential jurors who had Italian last names for fear they would be too sympathetic to the Italian Popolos. But that was standard operating procedure. There was precedent to back it up. It goes on. It goes on all across the nation. If it's a rape case, they would get the women off the jury. They would do. If it's religious, they would get. They would get the religious. That's how they did it. And so Henry Owen challenges that, and he files an appeal. He files an appeal 2 ways. He said, there's not enough evidence to prove premeditation, and the jury selection. So the high court will come back and they'll say, oh, there's plenty of evidence to convict them. And this will be so hard for the family, because they'll say there's plenty of evidence to convict them, but jury selection was flawed, new trial. So for the family, it feels like they get off on a technicality. But meanwhile, at this time in Boston, it's not just, Andy Popolo is not the only one not getting justice. Blacks in general that black victims were not getting justice. There's the case of Brian Nelson, which goes to trial shortly after this, and it's a car full of, I think, 3 black kids, a car full of like 8 white kids get into it in Medfield, like during a snowstorm. They wind up getting into a fight. A white former Marine, he's 19, kills Brian Nelson with, and there's witnesses, there's black witnesses, but there's even one of the white witnesses in the car, says he killed him with a broken bottle and a tire iron. And not only is not everybody charged, they don't use joint venture to charge all these kids. He only gets, his name is Colangio, he only gets charged with manslaughter, and then an all-white jury acquits him. And this was happening a lot. I don't know if you remember when the case in Charlestown, where a black school children coming from Pennsylvania came up to see Bunker Hill on a field trip, and 3 white guys with baseball bats and I think hockey sticks beat the chaperones and put them in the hospital, and they arrested 3 white guys, and they got acquitted, and they never got anybody for this crime. Now, in that instance, I do think that there was also involved sloppy police work. I'm not sure they got the right people, but it just kind of reinforced this, this happening. What was happening? This is the years when there's so much. The violence has kind of gone out of the schools. It's at Carson Beach. They're arresting white people they're arresting whites for violence, and they're always getting off because of the jury. So the high court says we're putting an end to that. And they changed the way juries are chosen. And this is California at about a little bit sooner, but about the same time, they say the same thing. And it will take 8 years before the rest of the nation does. Everyone, they're just considered kind of progressive advocate courts. And finally, in 8 years later, it will go to the Supreme Federal Court, and they'll issue the Batson decision, and that will say, so in Massachusetts, it's called the Soares decision, based on Edward Soares, because he's the lead defendant in the title. And basically what it says is, if you strike a jury, you can use your peremptory challenge, but if we start to see a pattern, any kind of a pattern, like 3 Italians, 2 blacks, 3 women, the other side starts taking notes. And then they can file for appeal, and often they are winning those appeals. So it's very effective in Massachusetts. The Batson decision is not as effective because there are a couple cases after, a couple years, like in Massachusetts, the Soares decision gets refined by other cases, and it's very effective, and it's kind of a model for the nation. The federal one is not as good, but it is an improvement in criminal justice. It changes the way juries are chosen. And so there's another trial, and that will be 2.5 years later. In that time, Boston has gotten sick of busing. It's gotten sick of the busing protesters. Louise Day Hicks doesn't get voted in. Pixie Palladino doesn't get voted in. I think is it Kerry? He doesn't get voted in. Boston is kind of sick of the whole thing. Also, most of the whites either now have their kids in parochial school or they've moved out of the city. So it's no longer an issue, or it's not as much of an issue. There's still a lot of racism in the neighborhoods, but Boston is getting weary of this. So they want to clean. That's sort of, and then this is the last thing I'll say, and then I'll open up to questions. I think it's 2 weeks before the second trial will start. And I'm not going to tell you what happens because I want you to read the book. But 2 weeks before the trial starts, Darrell Williams. Does anybody remember Darrell Williams? Okay, so he is a 15-year-old black kid from, I think he's playing on the Jamaica Plain team, or maybe he's from Jamaica Plain, but he thinks of Jamaica Plain team. They're playing on Charlestown football field, and 3 white kids on a rooftop shoot and hit him in the back of the neck, and he's paralyzed. And when this trial goes, when the second Popolo trial starts, it's he's still in a coma. It looks like he's going to die, just like Andy did. And like Andrew Sr., his mother is a very gracious, very lovely woman. I don't want revenge. Very sympathetic, and I think that's the tipping point in Boston, where white violence against blacks has just crossed over the line. Because even in Charlestown, which Charlestown is known for protecting its own, they're appalled. They help them find the guys. So it's all across the city. It's like right before the Pope is coming, and there's protests everywhere. It's like just another embarrassment for Boston that has an impact on this trial. So, questions, anybody?
What was the racial composition of the original jury?
The original jury was all white, one black man in the original jury. The second jury has 3 blacks, I think, and an alternate. They might have been black and Hispanic. There might be, but mostly just black. Yeah. Anybody else?
Which hospital?
Tufts, and it was because it was like 2 minutes away. They took Tom Lincoln to Mass General because his weren't as as dire. But they and when that happened, this police department, which just the week before got all this bad press for being the most corrupt, they're the heroes. So when they have the press conference, and the doctors are saying, if it wasn't for the fast action of the police, he'd be dead. So it's like it was a good moment for the police department, one that they really needed. Niels? Okay. No, because it's so long ago. But there was a moment. So when I first started, this book took 10 years. First started this book, Leon Easterling was still alive. He was released from prison. And I didn't know that, and Dandy didn't know he was alive. And so I was on a website where there was this nostalgic combat zone things. As anybody knows Leon Easterling, I'm looking for him. Or anybody, I'm looking for stories about him. Anybody can tell me about him. And I get this email one day that says, I'm Leon Easterling. And I think he's dead. So it's like, and so I asked him a bunch of really detailed questions. And he's alive. And I'm like, Danny, he's alive. And then he wanted to meet with me, but he wanted me to pay him. And, journalists don't do that. And I wasn't going to do that to the Popolo family, pay this guy. So, and then he started following me on Facebook and on Twitter. So I was a little weirded out by that, but I never really feared for my life.
Of all the stories to write about, what was it about this one that caused you to pick it?
So what happened was I had written 4 murder mysteries. And the last murder mystery, I really thought, what am I doing? I felt like I had mastered the form. I was like, I'm just making up really rotten things for people to do to each other, And then I thought, if I'm going to spend all this time working on a book, I want it to be about a story that needs to be told. I kept saying that to people. I want to find a story that needs to be told. And I said that at enough cocktail parties in Westwood that someone said, Danny Popolo is looking for a screenwriter. And I said, what the hell is Danny? I knew him. My husband played basketball, and I said, what the hell is Danny Popolo, need a screenwriter? And he said, well, he's doing this film. He's working with the director about his brother. You remember that night, that murder? And I said, yeah, I kind of remember. And I went back and Googled it. So I wound up meeting with Danny and the director, and I did do a screenplay, but they didn't have any money. So I did it on spec, which means you only get paid if it gets made into a movie, which means you never get paid. So I said, I will do this on spec if I have the right to do the book. And I said, I have to do the book the way I see it, because I'm a journalist. I'll do the screenplay the way you want, but if I'm doing a book, I'm the journalist. I have to decide what I think is important, what's true and what's not true, and all this kind of stuff. So we had a contract to that effect. And sure enough, they never sold the movie. So I started on the book. And then I think when I first started, I didn't realize, and I can't remember the moment, but I wound up hooking up with this man who had been head of the Mass Discrimination Commission, and he was a lawyer, and he taught the Popolo case and the Soros decision at New England School of Law. And he told me about the significance of it. And I wound up, I think, on a panel at the Boston Bar Association. And through him, I really learned how significant it was, in the criminal justice. And, I grew up, my father was a lawyer, my brother's a judge, my other brother was a lawyer. So I grew up working in a law office, like high school. So I just always loved I love legal stuff. Like, I don't really, even though I wrote murder mysteries, I don't really read murder mysteries, but I'll read a legal thriller. I don't know why, I just love the law. So that's how I wound up choosing this story. But Danny was not happy with the book. But we're still, friends. But I said to him, I'll give you can write the end. So he has a page at the end. This is how you see things and how I see things. So.
What was the racial composition in Boston in '76 of blacks and whites?
I think it was 16 or 18% blacks. I think at that time. And so the other thing was when the jury pool came down, like they start off with, 100 people come down in the room. Because the way they selected jury was based on voting records, because blacks did not register to vote, there were very few of them in the jury pool to start off with. So they since in Massachusetts also changed the way the jury pool is selected. They made a lot, and it was like a crazy system at the time. When you served on the jury, you had to serve for like a month. And because it was so onerous financially, they gave everybody could get out of it. So and particularly if you had like any kind of decent job, you could get out of it. And so one of the prosecutors said it was kind of like the intergalactic canteen on Star Wars. That's like it was people who were like out there, didn't have a job. It was young people and the very old. And the only thing was if you were a union, if the union, because a lot of union contracts would compensate for jury duty. So they changed that. They changed jury selection so that they really improved the quality of the jury overall.
Can you tell us what Danny didn't like about the book?
That's okay. I say this because people who read the book say, what? He felt it wasn't enough about his brother. But it really, other people, I don't know if anybody here read it. If you read it, it's like other people who have read it said, what? I think, I really love Danny, but I feel like he really suffered a lot of damage through this whole, the trials. He was only 19 at the time. And when he decided to do a film and a movie, I think he thought that would bring him resolution. But I don't think, certainly no book that could be published would bring him resolution. But we're still, every once in a while he'll send me a text. But, but anyway, no one should have to go through what that family went through. And, no one should have to go through that. So what I learned is if I ever get charged or if I ever have somebody I know and love is murdered, I think juries sort of just channel what's going on. It's like they're almost like, in some instances, I think you'd be better off with just a judge deciding, because the juries can't help it. They're kind of like they're just channeling in a lot of instances what's going on. And if you live, or they should be moved to a completely different venue, But it's impossible to have been on that jury and not have seen a lot of publicity and not have judgments. It's impossible, and I'm in the media. It's impossible not to be impacted by the media, I think.
Thank you very much. Thank you. beats you too.